Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to this very special occasion, the fullest of full houses in Glucksman Ireland House this evening with overflow. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the members of our advisory board who are out in force this evening, to Marion Casey's family and friends, as we gather to celebrate the launch of Marion's eagerly awaited book, now published, The Green Space, The Transformation of the Irish Image. Marion Casey is Clinical Professor of Irish Studies in Glucksman Ireland House and affiliated faculty in the Department of History at NYU. She trained with David Doyle at University College Dublin and with David Reimers at NYU, who's here with us this evening. Marion's long-standing goals in her teaching and her research have been threefold: to use the longevity of Irish emigration to illuminate the evolving ethnic and racial experience of the United States, to explore diaspora and transnationalism from Irish and American perspectives, and to teach students how to think historically. A very important thing today. Well, I'm biased, I'm a historian. In 1997, Marion established the Archives of Irish America in NYU's Bobst Library. In 1999, she was named a Centennial Historian of the City of New York. She's contributed to many public history projects, including exhibits and documentary films. She's published essays on a wide range of subjects. With J.J. Lee, my predecessor as director of Glucksman Ireland House, she co-edited Making the Irish American History and Heritage of the Irish in the United States. Marion and I, we've known each other since graduate school. I was just mentioning to Ted, 30 years ago, my PhD, we knew each other here in the city in that early phase of our lives. We both work on the history of migration, one of the defining characteristics of Irish history. More than 10 million Irish men, women, and children have left Ireland and settled abroad since the year 1700. Remarkably, that figure is about twice the population of the Republic of Ireland today. It's 3 million higher than the population of the island as a whole today. It's higher than the population of Ireland at its all-time historical peak in 1845, on the eve of the catastrophe, when 8.5 million people lived on that island. 3 years ago, with the support of our advisory board, I launched the Glucksman Irish Diaspora Series to examine the history of this extraordinary phenomenon. The books in this series focus on Irish migrants in North America and around the world, emphasizing global and imperial contexts and connections at the heart of diaspora history. Each book in the Glucksman Irish Diaspora Series tries to embed strong historical analysis in a gripping narrative. We want the books to be readable. Marion's The Green Space is the 9th book in the series and the first to feature a member of our own faculty here at NYU. We're dedicating this evening to the memory of Stanley Greenwood. Stanley was a much-loved member of the Glucksman Ireland House Advisory Board, supporting and advising us on our mission of teaching, research, and public outreach in the field of Irish and Irish American studies. As a historian, I greatly admired Stanley's intellectual curiosity and his love of scholarship. I didn't know Stanley very well, but our happiest moments together were spent in the classroom. here in Ireland House, that classroom, which other than Thursday evenings is our main seminar room. And Stanley would come and sit in my MA seminars and my undergraduate classes for the sheer joy of learning about Irish history. After that, we would talk about which Broadway show he had just seen, which he'd be seeing after the class, because he saw quite a few when he was here. And of course, we would talk about good places to eat. So with the fondest memories of Stanley, I now invite the president of our board, Ted Smith, to come to the podium to say a few words.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to see so many friends of Stanley here tonight. You know, Stanley and his beloved spouse, Jim Downey, would have loved to have been with us tonight. He was a big fan of Marion and her work, as he was of Kevin and all the faculty and staff. He agreed to join our advisory board because he was such an admirer of our chair, Reverend Glucksman, the founder, with her late husband Lou, what has become the premier center of Irish studies in America. Loretta could not be here because she's in Florida attending the graduation of her grandson. Now, Stanley died in March from complications associated with cancer and several strokes. Born into a Boston Irish family, he received his undergraduate degree here at NYU. And although resident in Boston, he became a major supporter of our house and an active member of our advisory board. He really enjoyed our annual galas, including that of the Rainbow Room, before he had a series of strokes that limited his travel, unfortunately, but not his enthusiasm. When my wife Mary and I visited him at the Spalding Rehab Center in Boston, he was full of questions about our programs and delighted in receiving the latest publication from the Glucksman Irish Diaspora Series. The former president of our board, Judith McGuire, visited Stanley at rehab and kept in touch with him through long, wide-ranging phone conversations. I also visited him at his beautiful apartment on Commonwealth Avenue, where he was so lovingly tended to by Rose Donahue, a wonderful Longford woman. Stanley worked as an attorney for the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, and he was a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, something not a lot of us knew. But his passion was Irish culture and classical music and theater. He delighted in taking the $9 bus from Boston. Sometimes he said, I got it for $6, and staying in his regular room at the Washington Square Hotel, sometimes attending, as Kevin said, a dozen shows in a single week, including musicals, theater, and the Metropolitan Opera. You could say he was a man of simple tastes, prepared to put up with the best in everything. Stanley was generous, an optimist, witty, and modest about his success in life. I was lucky, he would insist, despite the ravages of cancer over the years. At Stanley's funeral, a close friend recounted the many thoughtful anonymous gifts from Stanley. When asked about them, Stanley would merely respond with a puckish smile. Here in an email from last September is an example of his gracious nature. Hi, Ted. I'm still in rehab, probably will be here for another week or so. Rose is in New York City and she'll be back next week. Hopefully, I will then get back on the road to going home. I can't complain. I don't need anything, to tell you the truth, and I'm well taken care of. But I do need to go home and look forward to that. I hope all is well with you and Mary and everything else, and we'll chat soon. Bye now. Ladies and gentlemen, Stanley has finally gone home, and may he rest in peace. Please join me in a moment of silence to remember this noble man whom we will sincerely miss. Thank you. I now have the privilege of passing the podium to the great Professor Marion Casey, whose fabulous new book is a massive contribution to the history of Irish America. And much of it is an introduction to the archives of Irish America in a beautifully written style. And I've just so enjoyed the book. I guess you could say I binge read it. And I knew it would be fabulous because I was a student of Marion's. I'm really young. I may belie my looks. I aged quickly, but she was a wonderful MA supervisor, so careful, so thoughtful, and nothing was too small a detail for her to go after. And I learned so much from you, Marion. I'm so grateful to you. Please welcome Marion.
Well, I don't hope now I don't disappoint. So there's a big cheering crowd here. A lot of love in this house. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. I have to change that slide now in a minute. But first, let me thank you, Kevin, for that introduction and also for cheerleading me across the finish line. And I'm very honored to be in the Glucksman Diaspora Series. I'm also especially grateful to Rob Snyder, who wrote a generous blurb on the back of the book. He's the Manhattan historian, and to my beloved David Reimers, thank you very much for coming. And I just want to give a shout out to, there are 11 people here tonight who are related to each other through a small farm overlooking Dingle Bay. We're all descended from 3 siblings. So there are grandchildren and great-grandchildren of that. And, they made us who we are. And I'm so grateful for that and to be here and that you could all be here too. Thank you. The West Inch 11. Okay. Okay. So I grew up in New York. My parents are immigrants from Ireland. We went back and forth quite regularly. And so I grew up with two concepts of what Irish was, what it meant to be Irish here and what it meant to be over there. Sometimes that was, the Yank over there. Here, it was different. But so I've been thinking about this for my entire life. How did this happen? How it's diverged? And I also, once I started teaching, began to think about image or what Irish meant. I mean, if everybody in this room has a definition of what Irish is, if we went out on Fifth Avenue and stopped a random stranger, it would be in a different story altogether. It depends what you bring to that word, that understanding, and then how it's, actioned or played out. So I thought I would introduce you to the book by just showing you an image from each of the chapters and telling you a tiny bit about each, and then open it up for questions, okay? So let's see how it goes. First, to introduce you to the topic. This is an ad, a newspaper ad in New York, 1843, which says, wanted a clean, respectable Protestant girl to do the housework of a small family. Neither Irish nor Catholic need apply. 1843. This is 1910. This is a postcard. This is Hibernia, being embraced by Uncle Sam. Now, how we got from no Irish to this is an interesting story. And then how we get from this to this. Okay? So each one of those can be thought about, written about on their own. But if you put them into conversation with each other over the course of 180 years, you really begin to unpack quite a lot. This is New York City. That is Dublin in 2014. The postcard, this is a postcard for St. Patrick's Day. This is something that can travel between Ireland and New York. And so a lot of the green space is about the interaction. It's a transnational history of an image that's in formation, and of a word that can be used as a noun or an adjective, and that becomes quite elastic over time. Okay, so that's sort of the gist of the book, right? Okay, chapter 1. Who has a vested interest in this other than myself, right? Okay. This is the United Irish Counties Association ball at the Commodore Hotel in 1942. Most of the people, this is the Grand March, most of the people in this photograph are immigrants from Ireland. They are essentially working class. Maybe some of them would be professionals, but you're basically looking at bus drivers, subway MTA workers. Well, they wouldn't call that then, right? IRT, waitresses, housekeepers, but they are proud of their Irish heritage. They are mostly immigrants who came in the 1920s out of an Ireland that is just becoming an independent nation. A lot of them were on the losing side of the Civil War, which also heightens their sense of being Irish. But this is only one vested interest. They really worked very hard at promoting a dignified and respectable image that was also had dual loyalties. You'll notice some of the servicemen in the second row behind. This is World War II. Now, but by 1942, really, this world is invisible to most New Yorkers and to most Americans. This is a subculture that exists on the fringe. New York is not really an Irish city anymore by 1942. It was in 1842. So they have become smaller and more invisible. So who else has a vested interest in Irish? Well, Americans do. They are celebrating St. Patrick's Day. And you also have Ireland becoming very interested in what Irish means. Okay. So that chapter 1 is about that. Chapter 2, the media. Media now means print media, but also broadcast media, and how the average American learned about Ireland, the Irish, or Irish Americans. And we're going to play, this is for you, Dave. I hope this works. This is a clip from a 1949 radio show, The Fred Allen Show, which was heard by millions of people weekly.
Mrs. Nussbaum couldn't stop.
What do you know? Well, it's all right. I tell you, I'll try this little man coming along carrying the green flag. Hi, buddy. How do you do? Ajax Cassidy. What is that green flag with the gold harp on it, Ajax?
Erin Gobra.
You mean you're celebrating?
Haven't you heard the news, you heathen infidel? Ireland is free.
Have you been celebrating all week?
Me boy, as soon as word reached Kerrigan's, we all drank a toast to the Republic.
Yes.
Then we drank a toast to Eamon de Valera.
Yes.
Next, a toast to King George.
Yes.
Then a toast to Martin Downey.
Yes.
Then a voice said, "This drink is on the house."
On the house.
How we all got up there, nobody knew.
The new republic is off to a great start.
Sure, now we can concentrate.
Concentrate how?
With the English out of Ireland,
Yes?
we can keep the fighting among ourselves.
Well, now that Ireland's free, a great injustice has been remedied.
Only one injustice remains.
What is that?
The greatest injustice in the world is that money is green and the Irish have so little of it. Me especially.
Well, tell me, Ajax, what about schools and teaching?
Me boy, to me, schools are a waste of time.
How do you mean?
But if you're born in Ireland, you only have to learn one thing.
And that one thing is?
How to get to America. Goodbye, you.
So long, Ajax. Come on.
Okay. Now, this is 1949. People all over the country hear this in their living rooms. And they laugh like you did. How did they know how to laugh? There are codes in that. Aside from the fact that Fred Allen is of Irish descent himself, he was playing to a non-ethnic audience. The word republic, the name de Valera, the concept of fighting and drinking, They were codes that were well established going back, two of those into the 19th century, the Republic and de Valera very much for the 20th century. Ireland's efforts to become an independent nation were followed in the American media quite closely. This was a new experiment for a British colony to break away. So all the trappings, setting up systems of justice, postage stamps, you'd be surprised the amount of coverage this small island got from essentially 1914 right down to the time 49. Now, during the Second World War, actually, even before that, the name de Valera was not kindly treated by the American media. Actually, in some quarters in the 1930s, they thought he might be another Mussolini. He had flip-flopped on causes, well, be careful in this crowd. He was on one side of a civil war that was not successful, and then he turned around and went into government and, served in the government he was fighting against before. So people were a little suspicious of him as a character. They thought he was suspicious, let's put it that way. And then World War II came and he decided that Ireland should remain neutral. And Churchill and Roosevelt were not very happy about this. So there is an awful lot of negative press. And it's in that context that we have to understand this. This frames the Irish as not in negative terms. I mean, we could pick at it, but in the context of all I've just mentioned, it's actually more positive. And it's post-World War II media coverage in general tends to lean more towards a benign image of the Irish than the negative that we saw before. Okay. Oh, no. Sorry. How do I go to? There we go. Okay. Sorry. We don't want to hear him again. Okay. The next chapter is called Cultural Currency. So if you think of the first image I showed you of the United Irish Counties Association Ball, there were organizations that were able to marshal a counter argument to the negative media publicity. And that took the form of claiming that the Irish were here at the foundation of the United States of America, that they had contributed in the colonial period, and that they also were from a country that had a heroic golden age. Long before, poverty and distress and famine, we had warriors and body of laws and language. It's a classical age in Ireland. So they worked very hard to counter that. And one of the key, what will I say? One of the key instruments of making that argument was the poet-composer Thomas Moore. And this is in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Moore's melodies were published, they were pirated actually from the London version. They were circulating in the United States from the 1810, right? And they are ubiquitous at all Irish celebrations in the 19th century. They're also ubiquitous on sheet music in American piano, in American parlors with pianos. So in other words, you can have negative depictions of the Irish, like the No Irish Need Apply ad that we saw in 1843, simultaneously with a absolute adoration for the music of Thomas Moore and his melodies, right? And the reason that can happen is they actually exist in two different rhetorical realms. The people reading the negative depictions in print media or Thomas Nast cartoons are not necessarily the same people who are playing Moore's melodies on the piano. And Moore's influence is quite nostalgic and sentimental. And there are certain codes that Moore introduces to the green space. I forgot to explain what the green space is. But certain codes like Erin or Hibernia as Ireland as a female figure. the shamrock as the symbol of Ireland, the harp as the symbol of Ireland. And you can see here, this is a postcard that incorporates some of Moore's, a line from one of Moore's melodies, the harp that once through Tara's hall, the soul of music shed. Moore's music is still played today. Every St. Patrick's Day parade, the bagpipe bands are playing them. They also play his Minstrel Boy at 9/11 commemoration ceremonies. It's quite, you know, that's over 225 years now that this music is circulating. And though that was deployed by the Irish to counter negative media depictions. Okay. Racial reckoning. This was a tough chapter, but a necessary chapter. And it connects the two chapters before it. But I'm going to focus today on the 1920s. So this is Life magazine. It's the same Life magazine we know today. In 27, it was mostly a weekly humor magazine. And you'll notice it says the wearing of the grin at the bottom, right? The wearing of the grin is a riff on Dime Boucicault's song that was introduced in the United States in 1864 in a play called Aaron a Pogue. It's the wearing of the green. Many of you will know the wearing of the green. Oh, Paddy dear, and did you hear the news that's going round? The shamrock is by law forbid to grow on Irish ground. But this has an ulterior motive. This is published in 1927 because this is the middle of the national origins debates in Congress. And some of you may know that the national origins legislation that is passed put a cap on all nations that were sending, mostly Northern European nations. So in other words, Ireland, for the first time ever, had a restriction on the number of people who could come into the United States, right? There's a lot of back and forth about the size of the quota. It gets reduced. And who do you think gets the most? Great Britain gets 60% of the all-nation cap, and the Irish, they're kind of upset about this, but the main thing that upsets them is that the rhetoric in the debates frames the Irish as an inferior white group, that the Anglo-Saxons are at the pinnacle and the Celt is at the bottom. And they didn't like this. 27, Ireland has just really, from 22, it's a new nation. It doesn't look good for them to be positioned against the British in this way. So there's an awful lot of the congressional testimony is eye-opening. And you can see here, the Irish are lumped in there. You can tell which one is the Irish, right? You lumped in with non-Anglo-Saxon types. Let's put it that way. So that is a chapter that had to be dealt with. Then chapter 5, selling value. Another way that the Americans learned about Irish was through tangible objects, material goods, right? So this is a Belique butter dish. If you tried to use it even once, it would break. It's so delicate. Now, Belique is, the pottery is from County Fermanagh. It's been operating since the 19th century. It's a luxury item. It has a niche market in the export trade. And it was known and valued by Americans from the middle of the 19th century. This was one of the pride and joys of Ireland's exports, Belique. There was an enormous Belique display at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, for example. You can see it's in the shape of a cottage. So it also has nostalgic value. My grandmother brought this to my mother in 1965. My grandmother was a farmer's widow with 7 children. Her daughter emigrated. She's not buying it as a luxury item. This went immediately into a china cabinet, has never been used, right? But the reason she bought it was to buy an Irish product, not English china, to support the Irish economy, right? So the problem in this chapter, I deal with Belique's challenges when it gets its trademark is violated and there are imitations. Lennox, for example, pirates Bleak. And there are law cases that are also fascinating on can you trademark the word Irish? Can Bleak be trademarked? This is the symbol to the right is the Irish trademark, which is from 1905, I believe. Everything made in Ireland was stamped with that. So it was guaranteed that you were buying something that had been made by Irish hands on the island of Ireland. That didn't stop people from trying to pirate it. This chapter also deals with, this is an Irish export thing, but the idea that Irish had sales value, like, for example, Quaker meant honest, and that's why we still have Quaker oats, right? This Irish had a similar selling value, and Irish in this context meant quality. And so it gets, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. There's several pages on used car dealers who sold under their names, the Smiling Irishman, and then it has to go to court, and the judge, parses the word. Are you Irish? Why are you using this word? What does Irish mean? What does a Smiling Irish mean? It's actually very interesting how it goes. So that's selling value. Chapter 6, I call it the Emerald Sheen. Now this one is, oh, no, where are my players? We have a little. They are up. Or you have a lot. You can hand this. Okay. Where's mine? Oh, hold on. Just for a change of pace here. Okay.
Who's St. Patrick?
Why, don't you know? He lived almost 1 million years ago and he killed all the snakes in Ireland.
And he smoked a clay pipe like this.
And planted potatoes, lots and lots of them.
And he dug peat with a spade like this.
Pete who?
Nobody, you silly. Peat is something they burn like coal.
And I guess he must have raised shamrocks like this, only maybe not quite so big.
And he kept the pig in the parlor.
Oh, gee.
And he wasn't a bit afraid of the banshees.
What are they?
Something like spooks.
Ooh, spooks and snakes. I wouldn't want to live there.
Say, how did he kill the snakes?
With a shillelagh. See? Like this.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Irish player. Now, we did not make that up. That is actually from a children's play that was performed in classrooms all across America in the 1930s, written by someone named Marie Irish. Could you be more obvious that it's a pseudonym? She had dozens and dozens of these. They were, and this is the way in which a different concept of Ireland, especially related to the holiday, March 17th, was disseminated across the United States. And people who never met an Irish person, that's how they learned and understood the word Irish. And as Sarah could tell you, the myths are embedded right in there. There are no, he didn't live millions of years ago, and he didn't kill all the snakes in Ireland. These are all myths that are put on. But St. Patrick's Day arrives very early in the American holiday calendar. So the first holidays really that are celebrated and commercialized, if you will, or marked are Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving, all of which come with a readily exploitable symbol, Santa Claus, eggs, and turkeys. So March was really easy. The parades, you march in a parade, so that's already there, March in March. And then the shamrock, of course, the shamrock. So it was not too long after, this in 1932 or around that time, this is when you get an explosion. For a long time, the marking of March 17th was in the subculture, a couple of hundred people march on the street, not a big deal. After 1864 and Boucicault's The Wearing of the Green and Aaron Pogue, it explodes. the people in the parade will buy green to wear, to mark a green ribbon on the horse's harness, etc. And the larger and larger the parades got, especially in a place like New York, the more there was merchandising along the parade lines for it. And this is why there were props that the children could use in the classroom. And the other thing is that I originally had a separate chapter on movies, but the book was getting too long, so I put it into this Emerald Sheen chapter, because the way movies were promoted, especially those with even the thinnest of Irish content, was by what's called a ballyhoo. A ballyhoo is an advertising exploitation campaign, and the movie theaters were encouraged to get all the St. Patrick's stuff they could and go out in the streets and promote their films. So St. Patrick's Day has a twofold impact. Okay, now chapter 7, come back to Erin. This is about tourism. Here we have another material object. This is a souvenir in the shape of a three-legged pot, which was ubiquitous in most 19th century Irish cottages. So there's a nostalgic value. But the reason I use it in the book is because of the jaunting car driver at the Lakes of Killarney. Now, this is made by Arklow Pottery in Wicklow, but the scene is Killarney, the Lakes of Killarney. Why? Because Killarney and Blarney were embedded since the 19th century in Americans' understanding. If you said the word Blarney, they understood Irish. If you said the word Killarney, they understood the word Irish. It had nothing really to do with the place. It had a lot to do with that Killarney and Blarney rhyme. And so the other thing that helped people sort of have learn about Ireland or travel logs. And the earliest travel logs were print, tour guides, but also something called the Hibernicon. And the Hibernicon was like I'm forgetting the word now, but it was a performance, and behind the speaker was a canvas screen that rolled. And as usually the speaker presented himself as your tour guide, the jaunting car driver, and took you on a virtual tour of Ireland. So the scenes would change as he talked. That was extremely popular at the end of the 19th century, and then very quickly becomes part of the early tourist campaigns that Ireland uses. They market places in Ireland that they know Americans are already familiar with, and that that are easily accessible. When your ship comes into Cove, then you get off and you go to Blarney, and if you have a little more time, you go to Killarney, and then you go back on your ship and you go to England or the continent. But it's very tightly there. That's the initial, and now it changes over time, Irish tourism, but that's a little introduction to chapter 7. And now, conclusion. What does this all mean? The one thing I guess I'd like to just point out is that some of these things have been looked at individually, but I think that my work is the first to really look at almost a 200-year sweep and put everything in conversation with each other. And when you do that, you understand it a bit differently. There's a tangled web of associations and preconceptions and self and national identifications that are in what I'm calling the green space. It's like a virtual storage unit. You can reach in there today and take anything you want out. It could be Thomas More high art, or it could be something really, really, those red beards, right? But what's interesting is that there are invested parties who introduced these images to the green space, and they're there waiting for anybody to take them. There's no one to stop you, as there once was. People really did try to stop the image. For example, the association of the Irish with pigs and St. Patrick's Day, that was a big battle to stop that. So we don't have that anymore, right? that succeeded, but now we have the red beards. So timing is also critical to understanding what happened. Moore's melodies and Boucicault and St. Patrick's Days were spreading with ease throughout the 19th century in the United States, and they're generally positive codes. So music, melodrama, and the March holiday are counterweights to the more negative images that are floating around in media and politics and society. And even corned beef becomes a distraction, right? Corned beef is not the pig. Corned beef is beef. And you can't, yeah, so that's why we are not eating bacon like the Irish in Ireland. We're having corned beef on St. Patrick's Day. After thinking about it in the long, over a long arc, puts a year like 1911 in perspective. So there are non-ethnic consumers who are hearing and seeing fresh iterations of Irish through new media, such as radio, or vaudeville, not vaudeville, Tin Pan Alley plays on Broadway. Also silent films come in. You have Irish authors on lecture circuits going around the United States as well. The Irish are putting up statues like Moore, but also John Barry in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. And they're trying to fight the demeaning postcards. And this also complicates how they receive the Abbey Theater's Playboy of the Western World in 1911. That's also, you have to read the book to read that. And at the same time, you have tariff cases going through the Court of Customs Appeals that are debating whether the American public actually recognizes imitation trefoils as shamrocks. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And the true impact of any one of these requires situating all in relation to one another, as well as to what came before and after. And then you get the Irish Free State. Ireland gets independence, 1921. They have an idea of what they want Irish to be, and that really is a different agenda that adds new images to the green space. But by the 1920s and 30s, Ireland is up against basically an American juggernaut that's been in existence for a long time. So they have a lot of competition. They have biased journalists who the British are influencing for anti-Irish coverage in the newspapers, and it's hard to control that. So they promote the legacy products, the things that really are the quality, things like linens and laces and Balik, and they end up in court over battling trademark violations. They're also fighting immigration restrictions, superficial holiday novelty items, and tasteless movies. And then you also get anti-Catholic nativism, prohibition, and the Hollywood ballyhoo that overwhelm or undercut any efforts to stop that juggernaut. And even though they make a great showing, the United Irish Counties Association did heroic work. And Ireland made a dignified contribution to the 1939 World's Fair, but they were no match for the rampant commercialization and an American media hungry for English language content. There were only just so many fronts on which contesting what was Irish could be sustained, either by a small nation, its declining immigrant communities in America, or its Americanizing diaspora. And the image increasingly gravitates towards what's profitable, and the utility and power of the green space fuses transatlantic interests. And two examples, The Quiet Men in the 1950s and Riverdance in the 1990s are really good examples of the a transatlantic fusion. And here we have, this is what's old, new is old, right? This is from, I think, 1908 and Celtic Woman. I'll just show you a couple of, and then we'll open it for questions. We think Irish Spring? No, we had Schultz's Irish Soap back in the 1870s, right? Schultz is not an Irish name, obviously. The Placentia, Orange County, California, is selling shamrocks, lemons, and Budweiser beer. The Milwaukee German brewer is selling Budweiser with a shamrock. This is this year. I'm always taking photographs around St. Patrick's Day, but you can see now flashing shamrocks. I just want to point out another thing. This is National Geographic in 1976. So I stop at the end of the 1960s, because I feel like by then Ireland is becoming more of a player and is also speaking in the language that Americans know. But this is a consistent way that National Geographic tended to focus on the Irish. It's not their first feature, but it follows the same pattern. So for example, it says, rugged as the land he tills, John Hannafin stands with a scythe and sharpening stone in his oat field on the Dingle Peninsula. Hearts here glow with peat fires, and the Irish tongue is still spoken by many of its 9,000 inhabitants. But as modern influences invade the isolated peninsula, the survival of Irish traditions becomes uncertain. This is, I could show you something from 1920 that was exactly the same framing of Ireland. And Ireland itself wanted to be portrayed as a modern European nation. They joined the EEC in 1973. But this is a Ireland, and it undergirds the tourist image. It's a pre-modern, outside of time place. And this is Aer Lingus is the other thing. The Irish, St. Patrick's Day makes them fun. We're the fun ethnic group. And here, this says the friendly airline. Aer Lingus in the United States in its early years does not use Aer Lingus. They use Irish Airlines. So because Irish, has a reputation already. This is the new cup, if any of you flown over recently, which I think is beautiful. The one thing that Aer Lingus did not do is abandon the shamrock. They just kept working with it to make it modern and not kitschy. Okay, I think I'll stop there and open it for questions, please.
Thank you so much, Marion, and exercise my directorial and editorial privileges by
Please do.
asking the first question. In fact, a couple of questions that come to me in this wonderful presentation. So we talk a lot in this house in our teaching about ethnicity, not as something that immigrants had in Ireland, not as something they carried with them, but as something that's made and invented in America. And in that process, the migrants and their descendants, but also the host society play a part. And so listening to your presentation, two questions come to mind. The first is, to what extent here have you given us a template really for studying other ethnic groups in America? Because I can see how this work could really be done very profitably. And the second question is, given that ethnicity is an ongoing process, it's not something fixed, it's not something static, what's next for the green space? What's in the green space for the generation to come?
Oh, wow. I have slides for that, if you want to say it. To your first question, it's interesting. The Irish are not the only group to have an image. We can think of Italians and, negative images and positive image, food, mafia, right? Mexico also, we do Cinco de Mayo, right? But the one thing that's different, I would say, is that since the Second World War, especially, Ireland has had a generally very positive diplomatic relationship with the United States. It's no longer demonized than the way it was before. And Mexico is not in that same position. Chinese food, China's not in that position. So I really think there's a complexity. It really depends on circumstances and it changes over time. We happen to have been in this country a very long time. And I think longevity is a factor in this. What's next in the green space? I might save that for a few minutes. Yeah, okay. Oh, no. I'm moving on to something else. Yeah. Yes, Cormac.
Marion, just to turn the tables on you, are you Irish or Irish American, and how do you define those for yourself?
Well, I could ask you that too, Cormac, right? Couldn't I?
You're up, not me.
Okay. Yeah, that's a tough question. You're asking someone who, until I went to school, really, my entire world, well, my cousins, everything, we lived in an Irish world. We did Irish step dancing, we did Irish music. We visited Ireland. Letters from Ireland came regularly. We had an understanding of the world our parents came out of. And I think that influences who you think you are at that formative stage. And then, of course, it gets more complicated as you grow out. But I'm unusual because I've been working at Ireland House for a very long time. So my work life is Irish too. But I guess, you know, I'm Irish American. Yeah. And I will say that I think Irish America has been misunderstood for a very long time. And that the barometer of authenticity of what's Irish is originating from the island of Ireland. But in fact, what I try to argue in the book is that there was a whole history of what being Irish was long before Ireland came on and said, wait a minute, no, the harp is the symbol, not the shamrock. Yeah. Head, yeah.
Yeah, this is a fabulous,
He was a great student.
great speech. So I had some personal experience in 1976 as Irish government press officer in New York with National Geographic.
Oh,
And
did you?
we were having a heck of a fight between the Tourist Board and the Industrial Development Authority. Tourist Board loved this Dingle stuff and were promoting it.
Yeah.
And the IDA thought it was underselling, you know, the industrial rapid development of the Irish and being great employees and so forth. There was another thing going on as well. There was the height of the troubles in Northern Ireland. And National Geographic, it was like two different countries. So you could say, in a sense, it bears out your point that the power of the green space was such that it obfuscated this other country. You know, it was a, you know, what, 100 miles away this was going on, and from Dingle, and yet it didn't have to show up. And then as a code, I mean, so, you know, my question is, you can have two different images of Ireland going forward, or maybe three if you include the peace process. And then one of the final things, I had a fierce argument with one of the editors at the National Geographic over their use of the term British Isles. And his response was, well, sir, it's just a, you know, it's a geographic term. I said, if it's just a geographic term, why don't you call it the Irish Isles? Anyway, I didn't get anywhere with that.
Yeah. There were the poor Irish government. They tried really hard. They protested a lot of things, including at the, I think it's the '64 World's Fair. Northern Ireland had a giant Finn McCool growling at the entrance to their Irish village, whereas Ireland has no Irish village. They had the pavilion with trade goods in it, etc. And when the answer they got from to their complaints was, no, Ireland said, if this was a Greek exhibit and it was Achilles, would you be doing this? And they said, oh, well, you know, the Greeks are the Greeks, you know, and so they lost that battle. But I think you're right. I will just point to one other thing, Ted, that Balik, which is a Northern Irish, today a Northern Irish product, was not seen in any kind of political context. It was an Irish quality product. And likewise, the United Irish Counties Association, they never put the border on their banner. It was United Irish Counties. Ulster was part of Ireland. So they thought of it in an all Ireland term. Yeah, so those political boundaries are imposed and they do muddy things. Yeah, I stopped before. I don't deal with the troubles in the book, really, only slightly, but because it's a different story in a way. Yeah, it's a different story. Okay. Barbara,
So
this is my wonderful help, or
Oh.
she helped me on the index. Oh my God.
We've helped each other over the years. But I just want to say that you're really an Irish American
Okay.
because
Whatever she
because-
says.
Well, because we've had a lifetime of conversations about these things, and you would always explain to me how, well, this is the way we see it in America, and this is how we see it, how they would see it. And you would
Mhm.
always say they in Ireland in
Mhm.
this way. I hope I'm not giving anything away.
No, no, no.
Okay.
No.
And so I just want to say that the filter you've provided in distinguishing between Ireland and Irish America has always been such a tremendous education
Mm.
for me to also see the broader immigrant experience and how that adapts over time.
Mhm.
So I don't have a question.
No, but it's a good point. And I think that all other ethnic groups in America, ethnic and racial groups do, the further you're removed from the immigrant generation, it's only natural that your understanding of yourself and your identity changes. And arguably for the Irish, it is not as salient as that used to be long ago. There are other ways to identify yourself today. It's much harder if you are an immigrant from El Salvador or something. It's much harder to remove yourself from that. We have the luxury of being white and being here. America got used to us, and part of in some ways, I would say we kind of gave up the game to the United States. We let them make fun of us. We let them. But what do we get in return? We have a privileged position in this country that others don't. Yeah. Clodagh. Oh, and then Ray. Yeah. Oh, hold on. Oh, go ahead. He needs a mic though.
Yep.
Ray.
Ray McGuire, by the way, Judith McGuire's boy toy.
Okay.
I'm interested in this distinction between Irish and Irish American because I grew up in a totally Irish world. But by your terms, it's really an Irish American world. Although my parents were the only adults in my life who were not born in Ireland. We called each other Irish. And today, if you ask a local 608 carpenter, that kid Eamon, where's he from? He's an Irish guy. He's not born in Ireland. And we called Irish-born people Irish. And there were many of them, by the way, in my neighborhood. When they weren't looking, we called them greenhorns, but they were bringing, the carpenters brought them over, the steam fitters brought them over. There's always a place for them in the building trades. And that world, that ethnic world, still talks about Italian guys, Irish guys. We're careful these days, because it's not acceptable anymore. But
well, you're right, Ray. It does exist, but it's sort of not on the radar. You have to know where to go to find those worlds. The sandhogs or
sandhogs.
Yeah,
good example.
They're working underground. Nobody sees them, right? Yeah. So, but they would think of themselves as a generationally Irish union, right?
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather was a member of Local 608, the Carpenters. I mean, the Irish local. It's still today called the Irish local.
Yeah. Well, the United Irish Counties is still doing great work. The county associations, some of the members are here, Madeline. But again, I think you would agree, it's sort of only one day a year where we're really visible to the city. And they don't see that at the 364 other days of the year. We are actually, there is an Irish world, but it's not a fully enclosed world the way it was when you were growing up, Ray.
For better or worse?
For better. Clodagh.
I have I've been very privileged to be able to meet various factions of Irish American communities all over the country over the last year.
Yes,
and
I can't wait to
building,
hear that.
yeah, building on that, I have friends that are my age that are immigrating at the moment that get very annoyed when people say that they're Irish, and it might have been their grandfather's lost long relation that came over on a famine ship, and might just have like a various kind of name. So I definitely think adding to that Irish or Irish American, which one, I think definitely the time gap is going to add to that. The more we move on to that and the more people are able to come over and back, that's going to change it. But on another point, when you're saying that because we're so privileged, we get to be accepted as an ethnicity because we're made fun of. I'm wondering, I know this might be for your next green space discussion. Recently, Irish actors are all over the place. And during the week, Barry Keoghan turned up to the Met Gala and he was dressed in a kind of an old Artful Dodger look up. And the Vulture media outlet posted something very kind of derogatory, very much like the images that you posted from the early 1800s. Do you think that we're just going to have to lean into that for the rest of our lives? Like playing up the, oh, Bigara, fine soft day, like Rhodey, a laugh and a mess and drinking and fighting and stuff. Is that something we're going to have to lean into to keep our space, or is there room for us to kind of progress past that?
Well, I really hope it does progress
Yeah.
past it. Our work here, it doesn't lean into that at
Yeah.
all. It doesn't. But what you have to do is acknowledge that it exists. You can't
Yeah.
say it's inauthentic. People sing, what's his name? Bing Crosby, you know, what's a hit? What's a Bing Crosby hit? We're not, yeah. So Irish Americans think that's Irish. Irish Americans think that is Irish. But it's born in here. So you can't just say that's illegitimate at all. I do think on the Hollywood stuff, there's a great book by John Harrington called The Irish Play on the New York Stage. And he examined plays that made it on Broadway over the course of the 20th century and essentially came to the conclusion that only a certain play can make it. It has to be set in the west of Ireland. It has to be peasants and drinking and, you know, dysfunctional families. And in some ways, some of the Hollywood movies are like that. It's not
Banshees of Inisherin is the greatest.
It's not the quiet girl that gets it, right? No, which is 1980s Ireland, a beautiful film, but it's the Banshees of Inisherin that gets all the press. Yeah, so it's perpetuating an image. Yeah, so it's really up to those Irish actors to say, I don't want that role, you know, or I don't want to be in that film. Maureen and then Mary up front here.
Something that I've noticed in terms of Irish acceptance, I guess, I recognize the negativity that can still smack you in the face sometimes, but I've marched in the parade probably for the past 10 years. And prior to that, I would be a spectator. But I'm amazed at the diversity of ethnicities that are spectators and cheering you on and staying there for hours, actually. I mean, Japanese, all kinds of Spanish. And that I think is amazing and wonderful because you've got the Irish contingent for sure, but just to see all these other people on a weekday, out of work, you know, taken off of work or whatever they're doing, and they're really supporting and enthused and cheering you on. And I think that's a great testament to, you know, where we are.
Yeah, we have been embraced. Yes, yes. It's change over time. Mary.
My introduction to Ireland was James Joyce in high school and college, and it's such an extraordinary voice. There is a whole industry of Joyce scholarship, which is shared between the Irish and Americans in the English-speaking world, and he created such a fantastically wonderful explanation of the modern world, while also portraying this ancient country. And for me, it's a mental space rather than a visual one, but I wonder whether that might come into your next book.
Well, I do deal with not so much Joyce, but Yeats and Lady Gregory, because like what I just said about the Irish plays on the New York stage or the Hollywood movies, you know, when the Playboy of the Western World comes here in 1911, there are protests against it because Yeats and Lady Gregory are saying this is a documentary portrayal of Ireland. Well, for those of you who don't know the play, it's about a young man who boasts that he's killed his father. 1911, Ireland is trying to get home rule wrested from Westminster. This is a really bad look, right? To have on the stage of major American cities to non-ethnic audiences. This doesn't go. And when the Irish had their own, they had a hero. He was from County Mayo, Martin Sheridan, a New York City policeman from Bohola, who was the Olympic champion and the greatest sportsman of his time, right? He's on the Mayo banner. But so they're like, no, we have a hero from Mayo and it's not him. It's not the Playboy, you see? So, what is interesting is the way in which the media love to go to any Irish novelist as the go-to spokesperson. And you can see it today still. When Frank McCourt was alive, he was always asked for a quote. Cullum Tobin is always asked for a quote. Well, earlier in the 20th century, it was Seamus McManus, Padraig Cullum, and Sean O'Whalan. And so they interpret Ireland for America, and they have their own implicit biases and perspectives on it. Now, Joyce didn't have that, although there are legal cases in the United States about his books, but literary figures do have a part in this story. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Emma.
Hello.
Hi.
Something that is kind of, I think, relevant to a lot of the different chapters in your book, and I know you talk about it a little bit in the book, is alcohol, right? It's in the media, it's a major export, it's a tourism thing today, right? Those people with the red beards weren't going to go to mass for St. Patrick's Day, right? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of alcohol in that green space and how it's negotiated between Ireland and America.
Okay, so this brings me to Kevin and the slides now, right? Okay, and we didn't plant that question, but Emma's smart. This on the left is the way John Jemison, like Balik, and like lace and linen, was a quality top shelf export for Ireland, right? It only had to advertise itself with the name John Jemison and 3 stars. Everybody knew that was from Ireland. And you can see here by 1975, it's a little more difficult. They're still using the trademark label, but they have added a shamrock and they call it New Jemison. What happened with Irish whiskey? Prohibition dealt it a big blow. And from the Second World War, Scotch was competition for it. And so people had lost their taste for whiskey, had to be reintroduced to the United States. This is from the 1980s. You can see they're trying to get the American audience back. So you have to put the shamrock and say the word Irish. And this was this year at the parade, St. Patrick's Day this year, Jemison, the Irish hello. Yeah, I mean, I could talk for another hour about this. But what in between this and this was this. The introduction of Irish coffee. This is how Irish whiskey was made palatable to the United States from the 1950s. Invented in Ireland for Shannon Airport, and then really took off at the Irish Pavilion. They had a coffee bar at the 1963 World's Fair. Okay. But that in itself inspires knockoffs in different realms. Again, the selling value of that is Bailey's Irish Cream, which now is, you know, in everything, Mint Milano Irish cream cookies or Haagen-Dazs Irish brownies here. Even this is an air freshener. Marshmallow Irish cream, yeah. It's limited edition, so we might be spared, right? And this is its new product this year, the vanilla mint shake, Bailey's vanilla mint shake. What is that? What inspired that? McDonald's Shamrock Shake from the 70s, which is still around now. It's brought back. So you can see there's this enormous, the green space allows a lot of cross fertilization to happen. And so there's more alcohol, Emma. This is Guinness. The original label and trademark was the harp and Arthur Guinness's signature and St. James Gate, Dublin. That's all you needed from the Civil War in America down to about 1960 or so. This ad is from the back of a playbill in the 1970s. And the question, how do I know you're Irish, right? Well, you can tell by he's holding a harp, he has a hat, and he has a clover and a shillelagh, right? You don't have to say Irish, he's embodying Irish. This is what Guinness then had to go to in the early 2000s. First of all, it was bought by a multinational, Diageo, I think. And so they're using America's language to promote a product that goes back to the 18th century in Ireland. What's this? Notre Dame, you all know, right? This is the girls' softball team, right? They just have to say Irish and you know it, right? Because Irish and sports, it means Notre Dame. Notre Dame trademarked its slogan, Fighting Irish, and the leprechaun from, the slogan first in the 1950s, the leprechaun in the 1960s, right? Again, I haven't forgotten the alcohol yet, that's coming. There's an Irish, now just the word Irish again, right? This is on their newest merchandise, right? Notre Dame and Guinness, here come the Irish together. You can see the way the transatlantic influence here. And finally, the greeting cards. I mean, we did fight back against this type of thing, but alcohol, it's less pervasive on greeting cards than it was in the 70s and 80s. There was pushback, but you do get t-shirts like this. This was this year in Coles, I think, that one. And the Mexican beers get on board. And here we go. I'll end with that. This is, this is Dublin, but this is, selling in, I don't know, Target or someplace. So how did this happen? How did that happen? Why is it happening? Because there really is no need for it in Ireland, right? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So I think that we will, thank you very much, everybody, for your questions and for coming out. Thank you.
If I could very briefly say three things in conclusion. Firstly, Marion will be signing copies of the book. Secondly, we have a very respectable green space downstairs if you'd like to join us there. Thirdly, most importantly, from my perspective, how wonderful it is to see this book in print. And given Marion Casey's contributions to NYU and to the life of Irish in New York City, how fitting it seems to see this book published in the Glucksman Irish Diaspora Series. So, Marion.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And in my second home.